Okay, this is the Brindlewood Bay Writers Workshop. My name is Jason Cordova. I am the founder of the Gauntlet Gaming Community and the head of Gauntlet Publishing. You may know me from, most likely you know me from a couple of podcasts that I co-host, Fear of the Black Dragon and the Trophy podcast. I also used to be a co-host on the Gauntlet podcast, so I don't do that anymore. I am also, as far as publishing goes, I am the editor-in-chief of the Codex gaming magazine, and I'm the publisher of Trophy RPG, Hearts of Wulin, and I'm the author and publisher of Brindlewood Bay, which is our focus for today. So that's my introduction. I'd like to have everyone else, oh, and also I use he, him pronouns, by the way. That's my introduction. I want to go through and when I call on you, if you'll just say your name, your pronouns, and anything else you'd like for us to know about you. And I'm going to go in the order of the participant list. So we'll start with Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia, and I use she or they pronouns. I don't know. I always never know what to say about myself. I live in Canada, so I'm cold all the time. I really like snow, and I just really love Brindlewood Bay. I wrote the upcoming carnival themed one, and I'm working with Chris Bissett, who can't be here, on the hack that we're doing about the elderly gay couple with the B&B. That's really exciting. So, yeah, and I'm on Twitter at Alicia Furness if you want to find me there.
Awesome. I'm so excited about the hack. I think the elderly gay couple hack, I'm very thrilled about that. Wonderful. Calvin.
Hi, I'm Calvin Johns. I use he, him pronouns. I am at Anthropos Games at various places on Twitter, Facebook, things like that. I have written the Homecoming at Bonfire Cliff mystery for Brindlewood Bay. And yeah, I'm really excited to jump into Brindlewood Bay and Trophy and a lot of the events and community over there at the Gauntlet. So yeah, excited to be here today.
Awesome, thank you. Calvin, didn't you win one of the Trophy Gold contest places?
Yeah, I think, yeah, we put together the Anchor of Phone, which had mechanical quirks, I think, that folks liked that came in the top four.
Yeah. I knew I was like almost 100% certain you were one of them. I was like, I'm pretty sure Calvin wrote one of the winners, but yeah. Awesome, thank you. Let's go to, the order keeps changing, so hopefully I don't skip anyone. Max.
Hi, my name's Max Magana. I use he, him pronouns. I've recently picked up Brindlewood Bay when it was the deal of the day on Draft RPG. Fell in love with the rules and the setting and just kind of wanted to learn. I know that the Void mystery at the end of the kind of arc, and figured, if I'm going to have to write something, I should probably tune into a writer's workshop hosted by the man himself. So yeah, that's my story.
Wonderful, thank you for being here. Let's go to Michael.
Hi, my name is Mike. I use he, him pronouns. And I'm particularly interested in Brindlewood Bay for two reasons. One, I feel like it'll be a great gateway drug for non-gamers. And secondly, I just finished watching True Detective, and I feel like this would be like the perfect counterbalance / antidote to that. So looking forward to hearing more about the writing thing.
I'll tell you what, there's a really, really good True Detective hack of Brindlewood Bay out there in the multiverse. I don't know who's going to write it, but I feel like it's going to happen. So, maybe be thinking of it. Thank you so much, Mike. Petra.
Hi, I'm Petra. I'm from Germany. I'm a language teacher and a writer and a game designer. You can find my games on petrav.itch.io. And for Brindlewood Bay, I wrote a mystery that, it's about a silent auction that, as all the mysteries, goes terribly wrong. And then, so for the upcoming project, the Fragrant Void project, I submitted a bunch of really nasty rituals that for the midwives that the keeper can use to really mess with the mavens or their allies.
Yeah, I think people are going to be really excited about that. Thank you so much. And I think the last person is Steffi. Steffi, we can't hear you. You might need to unmute. Oh, I guess I have to unmute. Let's see here. My option just says ask to unmute. There we go.
Okay, that should do it.
Okay.
So I'm Steffi. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a Dutch game writer and developer. Last year, I published an indie game anthology called 2 Women, 12 Games, along with Liz Chapritkul, who's my best partner in writing. I wrote an adventure for Brindlewood Bay, and I'm on the Fragrant Void mysteries. I'm going to do the Children of Persephone and some of the Servitors. And I actually, before even hearing of Brindlewood Bay, I've been tinkering with a mystery game where people have an embroidery/sewing club while they also solve horror mysteries. And I'm specifically interested in whether that could be a Brindlewood hack, because the themes are close enough. So that might be cool to explore.
I think that sounds wonderful. Yeah, I think that's great. Fantastic. Well, thank you for being here. And everyone, I think I got everyone. Going down the list, make sure I didn't miss anyone. Okay, so I'm going to just do some introductory matters first. So this workshop, I wanted to put it together because I think we are at that point in Brindlewood Bay's lifespan where people are going to want to write their own mysteries outside of the official publication channel, or write their own homebrews and hacks of the game. And I don't think you necessarily need any particular guidance to do that. I think it's a pretty straightforward process, but I figured it's worth spending a couple of hours just talking about my thoughts and some things that I think you want to be on the lookout for or pay attention to if you're going to be engaging in those things. And so I had a Sunday for free, and so I wanted to do it. And I'm glad you all could be here with me to do this, to talk about this stuff. This is mostly for people on the, well, first of all, let me say how this is going to proceed. So I've got a few more little introductory things I want to say. And then after that, the bulk of this call is going to be divided up into 3 parts. The first part is going to be about writing mysteries for Brindlewood Bay in the Brindlewood Bay setting, okay? And then the second part is going to be about hacks of Brindlewood Bay. And then the third part is going to be a little less structured. It's going to be specifically about the Fragrant Void, which is a publication that we are in the middle of putting together, a group of us. Some of the people on this call are working on the Fragrant Void stuff, and I wanted to make myself available to chat with you directly if you had any questions about that. For folks who are not working on Fragrant Void stuff, who are on the call, or who are watching the video, you may not find that part of it particularly interesting because it's super relevant to just the people working on the Fragrant Void. But that's why I'm doing it at the end, so that if you want to bail at that point, you can. After each of these big sections, basically the way it's going to go is for each section, I'm going to just say a few things that I want to say about it, and then I'll just turn it over to you all for questions that you might have, or if you just want to discuss a particular point. And then after that, we'll take a break. And so we'll do that between each section. And so as far as introductions go, this is mostly for people watching the video, but I do want to say what Brindlewood Bay is. Brindlewood Bay is a Powered by the Apocalypse mystery game about a group of elderly women in a resort town in Massachusetts, a coastal resort town. They are members of the local Murder Mavens Mystery Book Club, and they are very, because of their devotion to mystery books, they're very, very good at solving real life mysteries. And so they find themselves stumbling into, or sometimes proactively taking the opportunity to get involved with murder mysteries that are taking place in the town of Brindlewood Bay and around the town of Brindlewood Bay. Now, that setup is a pretty classic cozy mystery setup. Murder, She Wrote is my inspiration, but that's also the foundation of many British afternoon TV dramas, right, that have a similar kind of thing. There's like a cozy element, and then there's like mysteries, right? What Brindlewood Bay adds on top of that is a dark occult conspiracy in the form of a group of people, not just women, even though they're called the midwives, a group of people called the Midwives of the Fragrant Void. And the Midwives of the Fragrant Void are a Hellenistic cult dedicated to summoning forth a monstrous child of Persephone that they hope will end the world. They're kind of a sort of nihilistic death cult, right? And all of these murders taking place in and around Brindlewood Bay are connected to the cult in some way. Sometimes it's a very loose connection, but sometimes it's a very direct connection. But in any case, as the Mavens, these elderly women who are protagonists, as they solve the mysteries, they learn more about the underlying conspiracy of the Midwives of the Fragrant Void, and eventually have to face off against the Fragrant Void, which is what the Void mystery is that Max referred to earlier is about. So that is the thrust of it. The game itself is inspired by Murder, She Wrote and things like that, but also TV shows, American TV shows from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. When I wrote Brindlewood Bay, I had a few very specific design goals in mind. And if you're going to be doing a hack of Brindlewood Bay, I strongly recommend you think about your design goals, like what you hope to accomplish in that hack. Some of the folks on the call who I know have published games I've seen, I know, like Steffi, for example, has probably given a lot of thought to like the concept of design goals and what to do with design goals. And so I want to share my design goals with you so you can see how they led to Brindlewood Bay. So the first thing was, I have another game I'm writing called The Between, and I was having a problem with The Between. I was running into this barrier that I couldn't get past in the design, and so rather than rewrite my whole game to try something out, I wrote another game to try something out. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna write this smaller game about, it's like Murder, She Wrote, and it's gonna have Lovecraft stuff, and that's what it's gonna be. And I'm gonna try out this mystery system to see if I like it, and rather than rewrite The Between. And so that was my initial impetus for writing Brindlewood Bay. It was like a sketch almost. But as I got into it, I found that I started to develop other goals. Principally, I wanted to fix mystery role-playing games, and I'm putting fix in quotes because obviously people have different thoughts on this, and that's perfectly valid. But I have an issue with mystery-focused role-playing games in that they tend to be one of like two things. They are either very time-consuming for the GM to prep because they have to consider where all the clues are, and they have to sort of craft their scenarios or prepare their scenarios in a very detailed way. They have to, or if it's a published scenario, they have to study the scenario very closely so they don't miss anything. Or they have the problem of the players just not getting anywhere with it. This is a classic Call of Cthulhu problem, right? Where the players definitely are supposed to be in the basement, but they never make it to the basement, and so they never advance the story, right? And so I've always run into this issue with more traditional mystery games, this issue of over-prep, this issue of the prep and the scenario needing to be too precise, and for the players' behaviors needing to be too precise. And I don't like that. And so going back even to the very first episode of the Gauntlet podcast, which was about mystery role-playing games, and that was 6 years ago now, I've been very obsessed with this idea of how do we make mysteries feel better in tabletop role-playing games. And so I was hoping that I could come up with something for Brindlewood Bay that would feel better, that would avoid some of those problems while also feeling like you're solving a mystery, right? Like that was important to me. Like I wanted the players to feel like they're actually doing something. And so that was another one of my goals. And then also my last goal was genre emulation. I very much wanted to make a cozy mystery game. I love Murder, She Wrote. I'm a big Murder, She Wrote fan. And, it's not an amazing show, if I'm being honest. It doesn't hold up super great nowadays, but I have a lot of affection for it. And so I wanted something like that. And I also like Rosemary and Thyme, which is one of the British ones. And I'm also a big fan of 80s detective TV shows. And so I just had a lot of like things that I wanted to kind of, from a genre standpoint, that I wanted to do. And I've always been into horror, so horror and role-playing games are a thing for me. So this was a big genre emulation exercise. Now, in terms of Brindlewood Bay as like a vehicle for community creation, that's a really important concept for me. So I'm the publisher of the Trophy RPG. And one of the big things with Trophy that Jesse, the author, and I, that we set out to do from the very beginning is we wanted people to be able to create content for Trophy freely. We wanted to be able to give them all the tools they need to do it. And we wanted to create a community around this idea of creating stuff for Trophy. And I think we've been pretty successful at that. There is now on itch.io, for example, so much Trophy stuff that you can go get. We hold contests and all that sort of thing. And it's good for the game. It's good from a marketing standpoint, which is, I will be just perfectly honest, that's a major goal for us. But it's good for the game in the sense that I think people are more invested in games that they can be a part of in terms of like creating things. So if you look at like Fiasco, for example, I think a major reason for Fiasco's success is that playset structure, that anybody could just grab and make a playset for it, right? And kind of be a part of that creative community. I think that's something that modern indie role-playing games need. And so for Trophy, we aimed for that, and I'm doing that for Brindlewood Bay as well. It's a slightly different approach in the sense that Brindlewood Bay has a very specific setting, but nevertheless, I think there's a lot of opportunity because it's a scenario-based Powered by the Apocalypse game. I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to create things, and I want to start that sort of community creation process, and so that's what this workshop is also about. So that's my introductory stuff. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to ask or ask a deeper question about before we go any further? Calvin, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned sort of like that fixing in quotes mystery games, and I guess maybe I'd like to hear, I guess what everyone or also you, Jason, might have to say about that idea of like the prep that's involved in sort of like the pre-solved mystery. And like the prep is one big issue, and like you said, like getting people to go the right way, but also the idea of like just not having the culprit sort of set up ahead of time. They're not necessarily related, I guess. I mean, you might be able to have a low prep game that still has that culprit already identified. And the fact that in Brindlewood Bay you don't, right? They're really the play to find out sort of philosophy. I guess just thinking of other people's ideas on like, yeah, that is it always heavy prep if you have the culprit named ahead of time? Is it always lower prep if you don't? Or maybe how you designed and worked through that and how you came to that decision then to have that culprit, you know, again, open for the players to sort of fit together themselves, or if you thought there could be a way to do a low prep version where the mystery was there. Just, I mean, those kind of two ideas as being separate, right? The prep and the mystery already having an answer, I guess.
I have some thoughts, but I'll let somebody else jump in first if anybody has any thoughts they want to share.
So one thing I did in my mystery, my mystery is a hoax. It's a setup. It's not real. So I did have a person in mind who's responsible for the setup, but it still works in the terms of low prep because the mavens have any number of ways to figure out that it's fake. So the DM does know that it's fake and they know who's behind it. But apart from that, the mavens still have all the usual options. So I think it is possible to combine them.
Yeah, my thoughts on it are, I'll just tell you where it came from, I guess, Calvin. For me, it was, so I'm a big fan of a game called Cyrun by McGay Baker. I don't know if people know Cyrun or not, but it's a kind of an older Forge game from a while back. And it does this thing that I really love called, it's a term I coined called emergent mystery. And the idea is at the role-playing game table, we just have a question we're trying to answer. We don't really know much about anything going into it. And essentially as we play, that stuff reveals itself. And to me, you know, so in the context of Cyrun, it's these super powered characters who have amnesia. They don't know who they are, and they just know they have these powers, but they know things about themselves, like they have a tattoo, say, or they're carrying something unusual. And so we want to figure out as players what those things mean. What does that tattoo of numbers mean? What does that strange lockbox in your backpack mean, right? And you sort of figure it out as you play, because things get revealed, the mechanics trigger a certain way and things get revealed, but it's all player driven, right? Like it's all player input. And I have played that game and games like that enough to sort of have intuited that it will work to also not know who the killer is, right? Like I just sort of intuited that it would work okay. And because I favor a more collaborative process in role-playing games as a general matter, it was just it seemed like a good fit. I don't know where the space is for knowing the murderer beforehand in like a hack, say. Steffi's mystery works well because it doesn't change the gameplay. Like you still play the mystery in the same manner. It just has kind of like a twist at the end, right? Where like there's not actually a killer, right? But yeah, those are my thoughts on it though. There was not, I can't say I gave it a lot of like proactive thought. It was more of a, I think I like this best and I know it will work sort of thing. But any other thoughts or comments on that before I get going?
Something occurs to me. I'm not entirely sure if defining the guilty culprit ahead of time would necessarily save time, because in any murder mystery, you have to have more than one suspect, which means you have to have multiple people who are defined enough where they could be a credible suspect. So I'm not entirely sure if defining who did it is necessarily saves you time. No, I say that given that, I don't really have much experience reading mysteries, but that's just something that occurs to me. I don't know how anyone else feels about that. If that's,
The only thing that would interest me in simply because I haven't played Brindlewood Bay myself is if you've ever gotten feedback from anyone who said that the fact that the murderer isn't like there is no fixed murderer. It depends on roles. If anybody has ever felt not satisfied enough by that, sort of the idea of, well, we're not really catching a murderer. It's like, like I personally wouldn't mind, but I'm wondering if you've you've run into that.
That's a great question and point. I know I have heard that a little bit. For the most part, it hasn't been my experience, but I think what that turns on a little bit is there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief and suspension of expectations that goes into playing a role-playing game, right? And a more traditional role-playing game where it's the GM delivering things to the players, I think that is going to be a harder thing to get used to. But if, say, we compare Brindlewood Bay to, to like the setting creation process of, say, Apocalypse World or similar games, right? Those worlds didn't exist before we sat down, right? Like they just did not exist. They come together in full just based off the questions and the discussion we're having at the table. And from my point of view, I think that that's the same thing with the killer being figured out at the table. Like it's the same idea. Like it's the idea of things just coming into being because we are talking about them and bringing them into being, right? And I think some players are just going to be more into that than others, and there may not be anything you can do about it, right? But my experience so far, I would say like 90% of players have been like, wow, I really felt like I was solving a mystery, even though they know they weren't really solving a mystery, right? So
I ran a game of it back at the very start of quarantine. It was my first time with some players who were also playing for the first time. And something that they told me at the end of the game, and I'm not a particularly gifted GM by any stretch of the imagination, but they were like, oh, we forgot that there wasn't actually a victim. Like they just got so involved in like all of the stories. And I think that's because, so I ran the Great Brindlewood Bay Bake Off, and everything was, I mean, brought to life so well that I actually really didn't have to do any work. I just had to read from my sheet, and they were just like so into it. So I also think that the fun factor of Brindlewood Bay, I think, helps combat the like, oh, but we didn't really solve it situation.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, that's really, really great to hear. I'm going to go ahead and press forward then. So let me, let's do the next section, then we'll take a break after the next section. And of course, if you have to get up, like, please just do so. But writing mysteries for Brindlewood Bay. And here I want to talk about specifically, or let me be really precise with what I mean. I mean writing mysteries for Brindlewood Bay in the Brindlewood Bay setting. Like there's the game Brindlewood Bay, there's the setting of Brindlewood Bay, and you're writing another mystery for it, like I would, or like Alicia would, like Steffi would, and so forth, right? So there is a document in that folder that I linked you to called Anatomy of a Mystery. That's just the part of the rules that are called Anatomy of a Mystery. And it's pretty sparse. I say in that text, just use this, just follow this guideline, you'll be okay. It is very sparse, but it combined with just looking at some of the published mysteries, I think it's a pretty straightforward process of just figuring out like how a mystery should look, what sorts of elements it should have. I do want to go through though and just talk about a few of my best pieces of advice for doing that. And so looking at my notes here, which I need to pull up again. So for the section called Presenting a Mystery, or Presenting the Mystery, I think this is really important that when you're writing this, you understand that it should be a single long scene or a series of short punchy scenes. And in fact, this should not take longer than 20 or 30 minutes to get done. I think that's even on the high side, honestly. It kind of depends on which mystery you're doing. It's a very, very fast section for, say, Dad Overboard, but for the Great Brindlewood Bay Bake Off, it's much longer because there's a little bit more of a game built into it. But in any case, you want to aim for that to be like just one big scene or a couple of punchy scenes where all the suspects can be introduced. And so that's just something to kind of keep in mind. The text should not imply that that scene goes on for a long time, okay? The next thing I want to talk about is the establishing question. This is the question that you pose to one of the players to connect their maven to the mystery. My best advice here is not to overthink it. I mean, we're looking for just the most basic hook. So in the sample mystery that I have in the folder called Exit Stage Death, that establishing question, which is on the second page of that PDF, says, whose nephew is connected to the show? They're watching this theater performance. What's his name and what's his involvement in the production? It's a basic question that immediately hooks the player characters into the scenario. The establishing question can be that simple. So just kind of keep that in mind. You don't have to do anything like super smart there or whatever, right? It's a simple thing just to kind of give that little extra bit of incentive for the mavens to want to solve the mystery. But importantly, make sure it feels personal. So in Exit Stage Death, it's the nephew, right? In another mystery that we published called The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soulless, the victim is a friend of one of the mavens from way back. So there's like that connection. For the suspects, you want to make sure that these suspects are colorful and distinct. And I think distinct is important. And I'll even admit this is something that I wasn't the best at in the earliest mysteries. If I could go back and rewrite some of them, I probably would. But in play, they need to have a distinct feeling so that the players can easily keep track of them as they play. If you have two grizzled old men, saying cryptic things, they're going to get those two grizzled old men confused, right? If you have two nosy neighbors, it's going to be a little confusing to keep them distinct in their minds when they're playing the game. So aim for like stand out distinct characters, right? And I think tropes can be very helpful. Obviously, you should try to avoid offensive tropes, but certain tropes, especially tropes that are not rooted in like racial stereotypes and that kind of thing, like certain tropes can be very useful for helping make the characters feel like part of the world and something the players respond to and the GM responds to well. So the grizzled old man who knows the dark history of Brindlewood Bay, that's a classic tropey character, right, from horror movies and stuff, right? So that's a good trope. Certainly, you know, I probably don't have to tell anyone on this call, but certainly avoid tropes that are rooted in cultural or racial stereotypes. Like, just avoid it. It's not cool. And yeah, you're just gonna, it's just not good. Just don't do it. And finally, on the suspects, all the suspects have that little section called the quote, where you basically say a little thing, you type out a little thing, or the text is like a little thing that that suspect might say at some point to one of the mavens. Make the quote something that the GM will want to role play. That's really important. So if you look at Exit Stage Death, which is in the folder, scroll down to the suspect called Gregor Thune, which is on page 6 of that PDF that's at the top. That quote is just a sort of rambling, strange, fugue state, bizarre, cryptic thing. It's very, very fun to role play, and it instantly gets the players invested in that character, and importantly, it gets the GM invested in the character, right? The quote should be something that when the GM reads them, it's either, you know, maybe a little clever, or it tells us something. It gives a little hook to what's going on. Maybe it talks about motive a little bit. Just something that is going to ping the GM and say, oh, this is something I want to make sure I do, or I make sure I say. And that's a really subjective thing, obviously, but just be mindful of, like, the goal of the quote is to give the GM something good to play with that they want to do, and hopefully it will inspire them, their whole role playing of that character, right? Okay, so moving on to paint the scene. This is really important, and I'm going to spend just a minute on this. So all of the locations in a Brindlewood Bay mystery are called, and they're in a section called Paint the Scene. Paint the Scene is a GMing technique that I developed a number of years ago, and I have baked it into the rules of Brindlewood Bay. And the idea behind Paint the Scene is it's a question that you pose to the players as the GM. You pose the question in order to explore an idea. And that's really important. When you're writing a Paint the Scene question, the question should be something that explores an idea or a theme or a motif and is not just set dressing, okay? So if you look at Exit Stage Death, one of the Paint the Scene questions is the set, and the question says, as the camera pans around, meaning the camera of our game, right? What do we see that subtly suggests that this is some sort of ritual space? So the location is like the it's probably more appropriate to call it the stage, but in any case, it's like the stage area of this theatrical performance, right? But importantly, I'm not just asking the players as the GM. We're not just asking, what do you see? We're asking, what do you see that suggests this is some sort of ritual space, right? For the backstage area, the question is, do you have any experience in the theater? And if so, what about this backstage area takes you back, right? So the question is there to help explore the mavens and their backstory a little bit, right? So Paint the Scene questions, the locations, it's not so much about what is here, what do we see, it's what do we want to know? Why is this narratively important? What's the idea that we want to convey, right? And so just keep that in mind. This is something, when I was giving feedback on the the mysteries that were submitted for this standalone mystery collection, that was my major point of feedback with all the authors, is that I had to kind of like say, okay, look, the reason, this is how these work, like this is what they're supposed to do. And it's an easy thing to misunderstand, but that's why I want to talk about it. Like, it's not about just set dressing, it's about ideas. Okay. And then the last thing I want to say, and then I'll open it up to questions. Okay, clues and void clues. For the clues, you want to aim for variety. I think that's really important. And you want to prioritize flexibility. So a variety of different clues, physical things, messages, objects, ideas, like just any little, like just, and lots of different thematic contexts. Like, just take a look at some of the published mysteries and you'll see there's a lot of variety in that list of 20 clues. But importantly, there's a flexibility to them, right? So when you're writing them, you don't want to write them so specific that the GM can't use them wherever, right? Because the idea behind the clues is it's something that the GM can just scan the list and say, oh, this will fit for this moment. Like, right, the Mavens are currently rifling through the desk of a suspect. So the clue says instructions to cut someone out of a will. So as a GM, I take that clue and I say, oh, you find the will, or no, you find a letter to the lawyer that says cut such and such out of the will, right? But that same clue, instructions to cut someone out of a will, that could be used in a conversation. So if the context is the Maven is talking to someone and they do the meddling move, they get the clue, you could say, oh, that person tells you that they had just received instructions to cut someone out of the will, right? So when you're writing your clues, aim for a variety of things and make sure that there's some flexibility in how you've written them so that the GM can kind of use them wherever. And then void clues. So void clues are, there's no real formula here. The purpose of the void clue is just to be creepy, right? That's it. Like, to be creepy and to be shocking and to make you want to go deeper, right? Like, that's the idea of the void clue. And so my recommendation is that you don't hold back when you're writing your void clues. They don't come up very often, maybe once or twice a session. And so make it count. Like, make it a big, scary, creepy thing, right? So that's an important point there. Yeah, like, look at them and, like, if you read your void clue and you think, that wouldn't creep me out in real life, it's probably not it's probably not good enough. So punch it up, you know. So I'm going to stop there because that was a lot. Does anybody have any questions about just the basic sort of anatomy of a mystery? I'm going to go into some sort of advanced topics in a minute, but, like, just as far as the basics go, any thoughts or questions? All right, I'm going to guess this no, I'm going to keep going. So advanced things. These are things that I think are really, these tips here are ways you can make your Brindlewood Bay mystery stand out a little bit and feel special, okay? So the section called Presenting the Mystery, you can write that in a way to where it's very specific to your mystery, and you can make it a fun thing. So the Great Brindlewood Bay Bake Off, that whole section is the baking contest that is the centerpiece of the mystery, right? The Mavens are participating in a bake-off style TV show, and it has a process for doing the contest. Like, everyone has to say what they're making, and other players have to say whether it was good or not. It's like a little mini game built into the mystery. For Exit Stage Death, the players have to basically narrate Act 3 of the play they're watching, right? Again, and there's a process there. It's a process for what they have to do to sort of narrate what happens in Act 3. So presenting the mystery is your best chance as a mystery writer to make it special to make it your own thing, right? So, add little procedures, add little mini games, put some questions in there to kind of like tease things out. There's whatever you want to do. It's a space for that kind of creativity, right? You don't get to fiddle too much with suspects and clues and void clues, right? Like those have to be a certain way. But the presenting the mystery, there's a lot of space to play around. So that's just my, just be creative with it. Another advanced tip, use other parts of the game to make your mystery special. So I want to direct your attention to the Exit Stage Death PDF. I have highlighted some things in green, which hopefully those highlights are showing up. Some people's PDF readers can never see those highlights, but I've highlighted a few things where I used other parts of the game to help tell the story of this mystery, right? So on page 2 of the PDF towards the bottom, there's a note that after the players narrate their part of Act 3, if any of the mavens has a shadow in the garden marked, which is part of their character sheet, if they have that marked, they can also reveal a void clue during one of the scenes, or you as the GM can reveal a void clue. So it's a sort of way of, when I wrote that, I was like, okay, there's a way. I'm looking at other parts of the game, right, and seeing how I can use them to make this moment feel special, right? There's another one in the next page when the character of the occluded king shows up in the play. If any of the mavens has the pallid mask marked on their character sheet, they'll do this custom move that follows. We'll talk about the custom move later. On page 4 of the PDF, depending on which layer of the dark conspiracy is unlocked, different types of information are available to the players. So they'll get some highlights there. I guess what I'm saying is, don't feel confined to the basic mystery writing structure, right? You can look at other parts of the game and think about how you can tap into those things and bring that into your mystery. I think it makes everything feel a little more connected. It makes it all feel a little richer and exciting. You can have clues with options baked in. That's another thing you can do with your clues. I started doing that with one of the mysteries called A Murder Most Mucky, but I also have one here in Exit Stage Death. If you look at I think it's the last page of, yes, the last page of Exit Stage Death, that PDF, one of the clues is evidence of sympathetic magic being used on a suspect, and then you pick one, right? So that's another way you can write the clues. Like you can give options in the clues. So just to sort of expand the possibilities there. And finally, custom moves. Okay, custom moves. Here's the thing. I don't know about your familiarity with Powered by the Apocalypse games, but I do want to talk a little bit about a kind of high-level Powered by the Apocalypse thing. So in general, most Powered by the Apocalypse games have 3 layers or levels of move, okay? This is in general, not every game, but most of them. You have, at the top level, basic moves, okay? And these are moves that all the characters will use. They cover most of the actions in the game, all right? 75% of the things that you might want to have mechanical weight are covered by the basic moves. But then you go to this more specific level. There's this, as we go through these layers of fictional specificity, we'll say, that's our good buzz phrase, fictional specificity. As you go down a layer, you have character moves or special moves, right? Those are a little more specific. They are moves specific to certain playbooks, or they are special moves that are used in very, very specific circumstances. And then the most specific layer of move are custom moves, okay? Custom moves, in most Powered by the Apocalypse games, a custom move is a move that is tied to one very particular fictional location or moment, right? It's when the author of that scenario or whatever wants to have a moment feel very special and important, you write a custom move for it, right? So think about Powered by the Apocalypse moves in layers of fictional specificity. Basic, least specific, most general coverage. Character, and then custom, okay? Custom moves are an amazing opportunity to make your mystery really hot, okay? So if you've got a moment that is like very cool, you really want this moment to shine when the players play it, you want it to be special, you write a custom move for it, right? So in Exit Stage Death, I have a custom move in there called the Prophecy of the King. When I wrote that, I knew that moment when the king, the occluded king, appears on stage, I wanted that to be a really cool moment. And I wanted it to be a special moment. And so this move essentially gives mechanical weight to this moment, right? And so that signals to everybody at the table that this is an important thing, right? I'm just gonna read it. If you have the pallid mask marked when the occluded king appears on stage, he calls you my beloved and whispers a prophecy of death to you. You are the only one who can hear the whispering. Already, this is an amazing moment in the gameplay, right? The prophecy relates to when another maven will die. In a future scene, when another maven is getting ready to take an action that will require a die roll, say, this is it. This is what the occluded king whispered to me about. This is how you're going to die. If they go through with the action anyway, you both mark XP. On the die roll, the 6- result is replaced with you are killed. The keeper will describe how. It is a heightened thing. It's an intense thing, and it's very specific to this moment, right? But the writing of the custom move signals its importance and makes it an important part of the scenario. So if anybody has any, like if you're going to go write your own mysteries or hacks and you want advice on custom moves, I'm always available for that. It's sort of a favorite topic of mine in role-playing game stuff. So I'm always happy to look over your custom moves. So I'm going to stop there again. Does anybody have any questions about any of these mystery writing topics? All right. Then I'm going to press forward. So the last thing I want to talk about for writing mysteries for Brindlewood Bay, we have a new type of mystery that the team and I are currently developing called High Supernatural Mysteries. That's the tentative name. There might be another name that comes, but for now I'm calling them High Supernatural. These mysteries are special episode mysteries that take place after the midwives are no longer a threat to Brindlewood Bay, or as side stories once the third layer of the Dark Conspiracy is unlocked. So they also, I'll add, I think they'll also function well as like one-shot scenarios. So if you just have a one-shot of Brindlewood Bay, these would be great just to pull out as a one-shot as well. Now, none of these are published yet, and they're still being written. I have one that's nearly done, but I wasn't quite ready to share it. But in any case, I put in the folder a link to the outline that I gave to the writers who are working on some of these. And I want to just sort of highlight a couple of things that make these mysteries different. And the big thing is they are supernatural by default. So the normal Brindlewood Bay mystery, the murder mystery, there's nothing supernatural about it necessarily. Exit Stage Death is a little bit more so, but for the most part, they're not. They're focused on fudge judging competitions and antique auctions and things like that, right? You can, with these mysteries, supernatural things are built in, are baked in, it's part of it, right? So they're set up mostly the same way, except that they have some new sections. So one of the sections is called Solving the Mystery. So this section says what it means to solve the mystery in the context of this mystery. In a normal Brindlewood Bay mystery, solving the mystery is easy. It's solving the murder, right? But in these mysteries, it might not be about a murder. And so you want to say, what does it mean to solve the mystery here? Suspects are renamed to side characters. I also like persons of interest, which is what Jamie Najati used for Apocalypse Keys, which uses Brindlewood Bay in part of its framework. But in any case, I made them side characters instead of suspects because I think that, well, this is not a murder necessarily, right? So you just want them to be, they're essentially just important NPCs, right? There is an addition called, there's an additional crown. So if you've read the rules to Brindlewood Bay, you know that there's this part of the character sheet called the Crown of the Queen and the Crown of the Void. And those are, I'm going to talk about those more later when we talk about hacks, but basically they are ways of exploring the backstory of the characters, right? And these high supernatural mysteries have their own separate crown. So for my mystery, which is about the Mexican folk saint Santa Muerte, the crown is called the Crown of La Flaquita, right? And the idea is this is a crown that applies to everyone whenever someone chooses it, right? And it's very specific to this mystery. But I have if you look at the document, you can read the details there. But that's just something to, it's important because if you're playing the main midwives campaign, you don't want to tap into the Crown of the Void stuff necessarily because it will hasten the character's demise. And so you want to give them another option if you're doing one of these side mysteries, and that's what the side mystery specific crown is. And then the last part that's added for these new mysteries is rewards. The rewards are essentially just bullet point items that can be found during the mystery that the mavens can put in their cozy little place, or special moves, maybe even custom moves, that kind of thing. Just a reward for doing the mystery. And I think with that, that's all I have to say about writing your own mysteries. I think that, so I want to let you all know, if you're interested in writing a mystery that uses the Brindlewood Bay characters and locations, I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. I'll probably put out some official guidance on this at some point, but for now, I'm okay with you just putting, this is not an official Brindlewood Bay mystery. All the characters are used with permission from Jason Cordova and the Gauntlet Publishing, something like that, right? Just ask me. It's not a big deal, but you can definitely write them and publish them. I don't care. like you can put Robin Masterson on there, and you can put all the various characters, and you can put them on your itch.io and make money off them. I don't really care, as long as you just have a note in there that it's our IP, basically. And if you are interested in writing your own mysteries, I think you should consider doing one of these side mysteries, these high supernatural mysteries. I think these are a great opportunity to, if you want to write and publish something to sell, I think this is something that people would be interested in, because a sort of in-setting mystery those are pretty well covered by the official mysteries, right? But if you do a high supernatural one, that's something that people will not have seen yet, right? And it's something that's kind of special and they might be more interested in. So once we have the first one of those out, which will be out very soon, you can use that as extra examples of like what those should look like. So with all that said, any questions about writing or publishing your own mysteries? Calvin.
Yeah, I guess, and this might be like sort of part of like the larger conversation we've been having too, but I noticed when I was putting together my mystery for the mystery collection, we had, some brainstorming going on, and it seemed like a lot of the other folks were having like very interesting, very specific, like really, really cool sort of settings. And I went with this like high school reunion sort of gone wrong type thing on the top of a cliff, and a lot of like generational play. I feel like if you're from a small town, I'm from the Midwest, but if you're from a small town, like, those generations overlap, right? And everyone kind of knows people. I tried to like play that up, that just because they're of a different generation doesn't mean they don't know each other, I guess. But I noticed, and I tried to make it very not supernatural in a way. Like this is a TV show, I was like watching the shows. I mean, I love those TV shows too. And so I try to make it as mundane as possible. And no matter what, like in play, like your group's going to do what they want to do too. And I think it's cool to see that sort of, that emergence in the moment. And I guess just if we're talking about making mysteries, it seemed to me anyway, especially if there's people then viewing this, like later on putting stuff together, those clues really are going to be important. Like leaving those open, I think, as Jason said, I remember writing through, I left mine very open insofar as, like pictures found or high school, like a yearbook, pages torn from a yearbook. And I didn't say who it was. They could say that. But thinking about what Jason just said now, really, those are still physical pages from a yearbook, right? And like how you can keep it open, not just in meaning like who it is or where it fits, but keep it open even in like the material form of it, I think is a really cool challenge to think of. And I think that's gonna, maybe something really that folks could think about too, right? Keeping things open in that, in two different ways, I guess along two different axes, was really cool. And then the fact that supernatural stuff can come in even when you don't want it to, or you plan something really crazy and they're like, oh, it's a weird doll. And like, it's not, you're like, no, it's a super spooky doll. I just love that emergence, right? Like the emergence in writing, in playing out the game then is just really great.
Yeah, that's terrific. If you're writing a more standard Brindlewood Bay mystery, you can never go wrong by aiming for mundanity, right? I mean, because part of the fun of the game is when that mundane situation is interrupted frequently, suddenly, right, by the supernatural, right? Like that's the pleasure of the game, right, in a big way. So, and you're right about the flexibility. Like that flexibility is really, really key because we don't want. We never want the GM to be preparing much, right? Like the idea is you grab this and go, right? And so the more you can build that flexibility into your clues, especially the clues, the better. Any other thoughts or comments?
I have a question.
Go for it.
So I'm really interested in it's almost like finding the space between the very localized world of Brindlewood Bay, right? The actual town, the setting of Brindlewood Bay, and sort of what's happening in the high supernatural mysteries. So what do you think there is the space for things that are sort of, canon? They're set in the world of Brindlewood Bay, but they're not in Brindlewood Bay. Like, for example, my high supernatural mystery keeps like Robin Masterson and stuff like that, but I've moved the location to what I know, which is rural Canada.
I love it. I love it. We are, through the series of publications, 3 publications, in fact, we are getting more and more detailed with the setting of Brindlewood Bay. Like that's going to be very well defined, right? Especially once the Fragrant Void comes out, it's going to be very, very, very specifically defined. And that's okay. That's what we want. But outside of that, it's really wide open. And one thing that I'll say is, if you look at Exit Stage Death, I put Exit Stage Death in the folder for a reason, because it stands for so many of these propositions that we're talking about. If you look at Exit Stage Death, it introduces a new cult, right? Like there's a new non-midwives cult in Exit Stage Death. And that implies the existence of other cults. It implies the existence of other supernatural things, right? And so, yeah, I say go for it. I mean, the nice thing about it is all the stuff that's going on in Brindlewood Bay is so contained to Brindlewood Bay, right? And you have that campaign structure that's just about Brindlewood Bay. And so when you do one of the side mysteries, if you do write one of the high supernatural mysteries, you can do it to where it just does not intersect with what the midwives are doing, right? In fact, they should intersect with what the midwives are doing. And so, yeah, I say go for it. I mean, obviously there's always going to be a division between like the official things that we publish and what third-party people publish, but I don't know, like, I don't know. My view of these things is so, like, it's not that important, like there's like a line of like, it's just not that important. Like, I'm excited to see what other people bring to this sort of universe, no matter how canonical or non-canonical it is. So those are my official thoughts. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts about mystery writing, Brindlewood Bay mystery writing? Okie doke. I think then I'd like to go ahead and just take a 5-minute break. I'm sorry, did somebody have their hand up? Oh yeah, Calvin, go ahead.
Ask real fast. You mentioned then the format for writers that might be writing in the future, and like where that place might be where they can find out like who the mayor is or what the principal's name is. Like I had to come up with, I made like the high school mascot, like the Whalers or something.
Right, yeah.
I was like, you know,
Yeah.
do whatever you want with that. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Is there going to be a place, or can we think of what form that might be? Or like you said, I mean, if you're just kind of cool with the synergy and sort of
I mean, I think we should probably do a wiki at some point. I don't want to bother with it. If somebody wants to do a wiki, I will support that in whatever way you need. But I suppose if it grows to a certain point, we'll do something like that. But because that actually did come up, as you know, when on Basecamp, for those of us who are working on the official products, it came up this like, oh well, what do we have the name for the mayor yet? Do we have the name for this person yet? Do we have the, you know, and that came up a lot, and we were just able to discuss it, you know, ourselves. But you're right, like for the broader creative community, that's not necessarily the only resource, is just to look at all the mysteries, and maybe that's not the best answer. So yeah, that's a good point. I'm thinking a wiki of some sort is the right answer, but there's currently nothing planned. So.
What about a map? Have you ever thought about doing a map?
There will be. For the Fragrant Void, we'll have one. Yeah, the Fragrant Void will have a map.
Nice.
Jim Crocker, who I thought was joining us. Maybe he's joining us in the second hour, but Jim is writing like locations for Brindlewood Bay that are not covered by any of the mysteries. And so it's like new locations that are just, you know, if you just need a location, and there'll be a map that goes with that.
Mm. Because I forgot who it was that who designed it, the Brindlewood Bay Community College, or BBCC, which I immediately used in my own mystery, and then I designed the antique store, and
right.
So I think it would be lovely to just have a little map.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, we're going to go through and like there's going to be all the places that are explicit or implicit in the mysteries that are published, plus the Fragrant Void. We're going to make sure the map has all that stuff on it. So
Nice.
Cool. Anything else before we go on break? All right, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 11 after, and we'll do the next section.
And I'm gonna head out.
Okay, thanks, Petra.
It was really
It's nice to meet you. Okay, we're back. Calvin had a couple of questions that he thought of on the break. So Calvin, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just, I was thinking you mentioned about like, you know, constructing that, presenting the mystery as sort of like one scene or a couple of punchy scenes. I was also thinking about the folks that have written different mysteries, what their thoughts are about sort of the duration of the mystery itself then, like how self-contained. Some of them it's kind of written, right? It's like one Christmas party or one silent auction or one sort of bonfire. But how many of these, you know, might take place over 4 or 5 days, like a mystery in the show might, right? Like we leave a place, we come back. And how you've maybe balanced, Jason, in your writing, or how often you've thought of these as sort of like not just the presenting the mystery, but the actual overall session of the night or mystery of the night being really contained or spreading out, and what tips you might have for how to either help them keep it into one night or encourage them to spread it out. I know it'll probably be a lot of how many different locations you make, maybe location's the easiest answer to that, but just thoughts on that, or direction, or what you think work best, or yeah, just around that idea of contained mystery.
I have thoughts, but if anybody else wants to share their thoughts first, please do.
I have a thought. My thought is mostly about having played it, which my group tends to prefer like the one-shot format. And so we picked up Brindlewood Bay, and we were all really excited about it. And then I was reading it because Perpetual GM, and then I was like, oh, crap, this is really like a campaign.
It's a campaign, yeah.
And so like I made some like on-the-fly changes to run the bake-off as a one-shot, which was maybe not as successful as I would have liked. But so this is something that I'm really then bringing into writing the hack that I'm writing with Chris, where the intention is to make it this one-shot play. And something that we've been doing, I think, is really focusing on keeping the location really contained, so that there's not this kind of desire to like spread out, because the more you spread out, the larger the scope, and then it's harder to reel it back in, I find. So that's something that I used. Whereas I will admit, when I wrote my Carnival one for the upcoming adventure book, I actually didn't give any thought to whether it would be like, could you run it in one session? Could you run it in a lot of sessions? So I think I really appreciate raising the question, just in terms of like thinking about the intentionality of design in the mystery, is like really thinking about how you want it to run, and then figuring out what pieces you can put in there to achieve that goal. But I think that you can absolutely write them so that they can be shorter or longer. And for me, it's a question of scope within the piece that you're doing that helps you achieve that.
And I guess that even brought up a whole different angle than, I guess, kind of what I was thinking too. I mean, I think Alicia brings up that good point of like running it being multiple. I mean, I was thinking purely, I guess, like diegetically, like in the narrative. Like, does the mystery, even if it's only a 4-hour night, does it take place over 5 days, 3 days? And I think you bring up, like that whole other idea of the interplay then between like, well, if it's going to be 3 nights in our time, but only 1 night diegetically, like what does that mean? And all of those questions I think are really good.
From my vantage point, in my experience, having run a lot of this game, every group is different, and every group is going to focus on certain things more than other groups. And so even if you intended for a mystery to be a quick, punchy one-shot, they might get really invested in a certain part of it, and they drag it out, right? And so I guess the way I've always thought about it in terms, like structurally, in terms of like the types of mysteries, is you basically have like, when I'm writing them, at least, of the ones I've published and the ones I've conceived of, there's like several types. The first type is like the bottle mystery, right? Where the entire mystery is in one location. All the suspects are contained and can't leave. So of the published ones, All Hallows Scream is a great example of that. They're at a Halloween party, and the Halloween party is literally closed off once the murder happens, and nobody can leave, right? Until the investigation is done. Those types can be done in about a 4-hour session, and maybe 3 if you're really, if it's your first session, it's going to take about 4 hours. But if you've already got characters, it's about 3 hours, and that's pretty reliable. Other mysteries like Long Dark Tea Time, or especially Exit Stage Death, those can go. We're on our 3rd session of Exit Stage Death right now on YouTube, and now we have like 2 mysteries going at once. That's part of the reason why, but nevertheless, it has a scope that is much more expansive. And I'll also note here that you want to consider that in your complexity rating as well. So when you're figuring out the complexity of your mystery, if you make it a low complexity, a 6 complexity, that's a built-in timer essentially, right? Because it pushes the players to solve the mystery faster, right? Like they can solve it quicker just because the number is lower. I will say to Alicia, who didn't expect it to be a campaign-based game when she first read it, something you can do to make any of the mysteries a one-shot is to just bump the complexity down to 4 or 5, right? Like if you make the complexity 4, you can get the whole mystery done in one session, and because they will have gotten enough clues or investigating to like solve it, right? So that's just one thing. Now, Calvin, I think what you're asking is a much more nuanced point than maybe what we're speaking to here. And my response is just that I just think about it in terms of, okay, it's either one of these bottle mysteries, or it's like a mystery that can go all over town, or it's a mystery that takes place out of town, right? Which are naturally more complex, right? So that's the only thought. That's as much thought as I've given to it. So, precisely because groups do tend to just do what they're going to do anyway, right? So, like some groups really love the first part of Bake Off, right? Of the Great Brindlewood Bay Bake Off. They love that presenting the mystery part, and they want to spend all their time there, right? And I don't love that as a GM. I want to just get going, but I try to be responsive to what the players are having fun with, right? So, yeah, Alicia.
So on this idea, I think of sort of what Calvin's getting at of how many nights is this taking, you know, in the game? Like, what's the length of time? I think you nailed something on the head for me that never came up in the games that I've run, which is that I have never managed to use the night move, because my players tend to be very like linear in their play, right? And so like not a lot of time seems to pass in that regard. So it was never, you start a game in the daytime, maybe I need to start starting them in the nighttime, I don't know. So like we never get to the night move. And so I think that there's maybe something to think about in terms of like how you want these moves to be used, so that they can guide sort of how you frame the length of time the mystery should take sort of in the game.
Yeah,
I think it's a great point.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I was thinking of. I mean, I was thinking of those days and night moves, and maybe that's why this question sort of came up later than after Jason sort of went over the different levels of moves. And like the night move is potentially dangerous, whereas the day move like isn't necessarily so. And mine takes place sort of at night. And so I imagine it would be at night, and I have like a rocky trail, and I was, ooh, it's dangerous. Well, it's already dangerous because it's going to be at night, so I don't have to write a custom move for the danger of that cliff, because I was assuming. And so I was just thinking how other people had done that, or, you know, if people are then thinking about writing in the future, like how they might think of that day-night cycle and if it's going to play in or not.
David Morrison, who wrote The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soulless, which came out in Codex Hearthfire, he has in there one of the cleverest uses of this idea I talked about earlier of like, how can you incorporate the rest of the rules into the structure, right? Where there's a location that are the caves, these sort of like ancient caves or whatever, right? And any scenes in the cave, no matter what time of day it is, you roll the night move, right? Because it's more dangerous, right? And because it's dark. So that's like one way of kind of playing with that idea, I guess, for sure. Yeah. Well, I do want to get to the next part before we run out of time. So let's talk about hacks. Hacks. Okay, so this is something we're kind of all figuring out together, if I'm being perfectly honest. I'm working on some hacks at Brindlewood Bay, but I have not come up with a pedagogical standard here for like how this should go, right? So I am working on a few myself. I'm working on Pizza Time, which is about a group of people in the last night of a legendary pizza arcade, like Chuck E. Cheese style restaurants being closed, and they've paid money to spend the last night there, and it's all kinds of crazy supernatural stuff goes on, and there's a mystery about some people who went missing connected to the restaurant. I'm working on Blood and Black Velvet. That one's a little not quite as far along, but Blood and Black Velvet is about a young British lord who is part of a sort of secret service for Queen Victoria, and he is going after a death cult. It's him and his servants going after a death cult, and his butler is a demon. This is very directly inspired by some anime stuff that's out there in the world, although mine is not nearly as problematic as Black Butler, but it is very, very gay and very, very erotic. So if that's something that intrigues you, be on the lookout for that. And then there's the Between, of course, as well, which is the game of Victorian monster hunters. I'm also writing Blood and Black Velvet to try out something for the Between, so I will eventually get the Between done between writing all these other games. So those are my hacks, and I've got lots of different things kind of going, and so I've kind of come up with just some basic thoughts on what is a hack of Brindlewood Bay, but I'll caveat all of it by saying I don't think there are any hard and fast rules here for what counts as a Brindlewood Bay hack. Brindlewood Bay itself takes its influences from many other role-playing games, and so your game can take as much or as little from Brindlewood Bay as is necessary to achieve your design goals, right? And it'll count as a Brindlewood Bay hack. But having said that, I do think that there are some things that make Brindlewood Bay stand apart from a typical Powered by the Apocalypse role-playing game. And I want to just kind of go through those pretty quickly here. The first is that core mystery engine. This idea of you have a move for gathering clues. The clues are flexible and can be airdropped wherever they're needed, and then that there's no canonical solution to the mystery. And then you have that move, theorize, or whatever your version of theorize is, that allows you to allows the players to talk about the solution to the mystery and come up with that solution. So I think that's a big core part of the Brindlewood Bay experience. I think it should be a big part of any game that wants to hack Brindlewood Bay, because I think that's kind of what it offers, right? I talked already about like this trouble that mystery role-playing games frequently have. I think that this core mystery system solves many of those troubles and is indeed very fun, and people get into it and it feels like solving a mystery. And so that, I think you can do a lot worse than just trying to see how to use that core system to achieve your design goals, right? There's nothing about it that is specific to little old ladies in coastal Massachusetts, right? There's nothing about it. Like you can take that mystery system and apply it to so many different contexts. And in fact, the theorize move is even based off something we published in Codex a while ago, a few years ago. So even that had like its origin somewhere else. But to me, that's the core of it. I think another thing that you can maybe take from Brindlewood Bay is the mystery structure. I think that the future of indie role-playing games are scenarios and adventures. And so I think it's a missed opportunity for like indie publishers. And so if you can come up with a way of having like if your design can create space for like standalone scenarios or individual mysteries or whatever, I think that's a great thing to do. I think it just adds a lot of value, and I think it's going to get people more involved in your game, right? But that structure is really important. The presentation of the mystery, what solving it means, your list of side characters or suspects. I think you should do paint the scene for your locations. I just think it's a powerful, powerful GM technique. Many people consider it foundational for indie RPGs, so there's nothing wrong with grabbing it and making it a part of your game. Of course, the airdroppable clues, and then some sort of grim portents. I say grim portents here because that's an old Dungeon World term if you're into Dungeon World, but that's what the void clues are. The void clues are just like telegraphing danger. They're telegraphing something deeper and darker, right? I think that's something that you can put into whatever your scenario structure is that hints at the bigger story. I think that's important. And that actually, I actually want to skip down in my notes a little bit to go straight to campaign structure. I think that's a big part of Brindlewood Bay. Most role-playing games that have a campaign, that campaign is about, I'm sorry, did someone say something? That campaign is about events, right? Like it's a list of events. It's a temporal thing, right? Whereas the Brindlewood Bay campaign structure is not about a sequence of events. It's about narrative beats, right? That's the thing. It's divided up into layers, with the first layer being this particular narrative beat of learning the history, the hidden history of the town, right? The second layer is introducing the maven, or the midwives rather. The third layer is direct action by the midwives, and the fourth layer, of course, is the void mystery. So the campaign structure is, again, kind of like paint the scene. The campaign structure is about narrative beats. It's about ideas. It's not about thing one happens, then thing two happens, then thing three happens, right? It's more about, like just key storytelling moments, right? So another thing that I think is central to this system is this idea of duality. In Brindlewood Bay, the characters have this thing on the sheet called the Crown of the Queen and the Crown of the Void. In my other game, The Between, this is called the Janus Mask, and it's the mask of the past and the mask of the future. But the idea here is that these are elements that help explore backstory or the inner life of the player character outside of the goings on of the actual, what the game is about, right? So in Brindlewood Bay, the Crown of the Queen is about exploring the idea of the Mavens as women, right? Because that's something I didn't want to get lost in the gameplay. I knew, I know what the game is about. I knew what I wanted the game to do, but I did not want it to get lost that these characters are women. That's an important part of them, and you are going to reckon with that in the story. Like you're gonna engage with it, because if you don't engage with it, you are gonna die. So like you have to engage with it, right? Because these crown things, they give you basically a narrative do-over, right? So that's what the Crown of the Queen is. And then the Crown of the Void is this idea of they are at a precipice, right? They're on a precipice of like between the life they've known in Brindlewood Bay and what's coming with these midwives, like the danger of the occult that's suddenly creeping into their world, right? So that is a key part of the story of Brindlewood Bay, and that's what I call the duality mechanic does, right? In the between, it's called the Janus Mask, and it's the mask of the past and the mask of the future. And so the mask of the past is about where these monster hunters, these Victorian monster hunters, where they were before they became a Victorian era monster hunter, right? And then the mask of the future is about, are they going to give into the darkness? Are they going to give into their vices? Are they going to spiral and descend or not, right? Like that's what that's about. So in all of my game design, I strongly favor very, very rich exploration of player characters in play, not before play. So to put my money where my mouth is, I like these mechanics because it allows you to explore it in the middle of gameplay, as opposed to everybody coming to the table with a big idea of what their character's about, right? So your hack, I strongly advise your hack do something like this, because I think it makes for a richer, more interesting experience. And just to give you another example, in Pizza Time, the equivalent mechanic in Pizza Time is called the merch stand. So your players sort of go to the cosmic merchandise counter and use their tickets to buy backstory things, right? So it's a way of it's a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing that accomplishes the same goal, right? Like tell us about these characters, right? So I think you could do a lot worse than spending some time with this mechanic in Brindlewood Bay and seeing how a similar mechanic can help you achieve your design goal. I think the day move and the night move are important to Brindlewood Bay, and the between. That actually came from the between. That you can obviously do variations there. It doesn't have to be exactly as I have it in Brindlewood Bay. The main idea is, in a mystery game, I think there is this division between daytime and nighttime. And to me, nighttime is more dangerous. Nighttime is more thematically ominous, right? And so we have these moves to sort of represent that. I think that you can definitely make some changes to those moves to fit your idea of your game better. I think you should stay focused on the fictional negotiation aspect. Like there's a fictional negotiation, not a literal negotiation, but it's a sort of like, okay, when I do the night move, I say what I think could go wrong. And then the GM says, okay, but it's worse than that, right? Like that little interplay is really important to the outcome. Another example of this is actually Trophy. The Trophy risk roll has this sort of like this negotiation built into it. That's another great example. And indeed, the Trophy risk roll is modeled in part on some of these things we're talking about. So that's another thing. So those are my thoughts on just like what makes a Brindlewood Bay hack. I truly believe that the core mystery thing is the main thing, but those other little bits, they all kind of come together. And I think those things are also fairly novel. Like these are not just things you find in other Powered by the Apocalypse games. The Crown of the Queen, the Crown of the Void is very, very novel. The core mystery system is novel, that sort of thing. So I want to hear, if you have any ideas for hacks, I'd love to hear them, or if you just have any questions or thoughts on those.
Oh, I have hacks. I feel like I'm talking so much. I'm sorry. This is...
It's okay. There's only a few of us on the call, so.
So I have obviously the hack I'm actively working on for Fragrant Void, which we can talk about like later, because that's a unique case where it's also happening in Brindlewood Bay, right? It's happening in that location. So that's a little bit different. But so I have this idea of this taking Brindlewood Bay and making it GM-less, basically. So you no longer have a keeper. I mean, my idea is to do it through this like paranormal investigators sort of theme. And I really like that you were talking about, I'm all over the place already, this idea of making a game that like then other creators can plug into with their like scenarios or adventures, because that's kind of what I want to do with this. Where the idea being like, you're going on this mystery and it's taking this Brindlewood Bay, this core mystery engine idea, but then we're sort of generating the scenario through playing cards. And so the scenario is like a series of prompts through these playing cards for like a location, and that would also be where our side characters would be, because it's not necessarily a murder, of course, and our clues as well. And so I'm just really wrestling right now with basically taking Brindlewood Bay and then removing the keeper from it, which is a lot harder than it sounds, actually. GM-less games are really hard to write, is what I'm learning. And my second one is a little more straightforward. It's basically the family-friendly version of Brindlewood Bay. I want to take, instead of, older women, I want to take kids. I want to do this idea of like these young, really enthusiastic go-getter kids.
Like a kids on bikes thing, like a Stranger Things, or? Yeah,
so I'm not sure if I want to. It's interesting. I wasn't sure about bringing in the darker elements. I either tend to go things that are very not appropriate for children, or things that are really, really appropriate for children. And so I personally need to find the balance of what those darker elements are. What is, can I bring the void in? Do I want to? Is it just like a sort of mundane, these kids love running around investigating murderers and focusing on that sort of cozy aspect of it? But a big design thing for me here is speaking to that duality where these kids are on the cusp, right? So you're leaving childhood behind and you're like moving into adulthood is sort of what I want to bring through, which actually maybe answers my own questions about, I feel like there should be darker elements then, because adulthood is scary. That's what's scary, right? It's like growing up. Anyway, those are my hacks that I'm thinking of.
I love that, what you just said about being on the cusp of adulthood. I think that's great. Like, that's a perfect example of that sort of duality mechanic, which is a terrible name for that, by the way, but I just didn't know what else to call it. But like you know what I'm talking about. Like I think it's a great example of it, because it's about the transition, right? And it's about the transition, and it's about exploring who these characters are and who they may be, right? Or who they will be, who they might be, right? I think that's a really, really great idea.
Something I've been pondering just now is like trying to adapt this to the superhero genre, mostly because I've been like I've been on a big superhero kick this year in particular. I mean, always, but especially this year in particular. And I've toyed with a couple ways of approaching that. I mean, I guess I could go meta and like do it from the perspective of like, I don't know, like a creative team behind behind a comic book, maybe something maybe a one shot that even takes place at a comic book convention, which would it'll be easy to like get into like dark territory pretty quickly. Sadly, these days, the more we hear about comic book conventions, I also thought about the possibility of like, in order to kind of stay with the cozy theme of Brindlewood Bay, doing like I don't know, maybe referencing like earlier genres of comic books that were like, you know, back when like detective stories were like the big thing instead of superheroes. But that's just something I've just started to think about. I don't know if you've heard of anyone who's even approached that, or if you have any.
I have to imagine that a street level detective type story is going to be an easier fit. But maybe I'm not being maybe I'm not being imaginative enough or something.
Yeah.
But to me, like it feels like the easier fit.
Yeah, I think the potential drawback for that is it might just feel like almost like almost like a vanilla kind of like mystery play. I guess it depends on how you apply it, of course. But
right, yeah.
I like that idea though with superheroes. I mean, even having like the crowns, right? You could have, I mean, you know, if it is that street level thing, it's like, you know, what side, like how dark you might go or something with it. Also, like the void clues would be like when the supervillain's there versus the regular clues. Like it's a mundane plot. Like which of your villains is behind it in your rogues gallery? Like, I mean, I guess it'd be a cool exercise anyway, really to try to match it up 1-to-1 first, see what that looks like before you get too different. But I bet it could be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I saw Aaron raise his hand, but I want to just say real quick, I kind of love the idea of like, you know, if we're talking about like campaign structure, like the equivalent to the Dark Conspiracy of Brindlewood Bay could be like the League of Doom or whatever the hell they're called. And I don't read comic books, so, but whatever the bad, evil villain organization is, being the big campaign structure, and then the individual mysteries being like an individual villain, right, that they have to encounter and deal with, right? That's a great structure, right? I think that would work. But Aaron, what do you want to say? Oh, we can't hear you. Okay, we'll wait for you to get back. Sorry, Michael, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I guess what I'm picking up from your last suggestion is like assuming a world where maybe at least where super powered characters aren't necessarily even prominent or perhaps even known, but then you just slowly uncover, I guess, you know, a super powered conspiracy behind, like, you know, real world events. Yeah, I think that could work really well. Or maybe even the idea of like playing like regular humans in a world where, you know, super powered characters are prominent, which is kind of like the take of you know, if you're familiar with the Astro City comic book, it's like set in the four color superhero universe, but the characters are often just like regular people, the protagonists. So yeah, I guess those are things I'll ponder as I don't know how much you read Batman. Batman's the one comic book I kind of know something about just because I like the video games. But like there's this whole storyline in the Batman comics that's like the Court of the Owls, which is like this. They're like these big behind the scenes power players, right? And I could totally imagine a Batman sort of hack where you are Batman and his various you know, sidekicks or whatever, who are investigating, like, you know, one session it's, you know, the Riddler, one session it's Clayface, one session it's this character or that character, but in the background you have that Court of Owls conspiracy, right, that sort of ties it all together, or the, you know, the Joker or someone is behind it all, or something like that, right? But my point being that like that is a way of using the structure, the sort of scenario-based structure, right? So yeah. The last thing I'll say about that is that concept of like superpowers would certainly upend the you know, the void the occult mechanics of this kind of thing. If it's a world where superpowers are common. But you'd have to rewrite your moves for sure, right? Yeah, like you're not going to get away with like the as written Brindlewood Bay moves. Like it won't work. But you can still keep those sort of big structural ideas and I think that have that be very effective for sure. Yeah, I'd probably start with like a nice high supernatural mystery, as you suggested.
Right.
Well, like the superpowers are easily slotted in as your Maven moves also.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
But what I was going to point out, and I threw it in the chat also, is that I was tinkering with a Brindlewood Bay powered version of like Tintin, Corto Maltese, Gil Jordan, Lupin the Third, these sort of continental adventure stories with the Cold War as a backdrop of adventures.
Like a pulp thing, or?
Yeah, well, it's sort of pulp, but it's way more like Jean Le Carré, like spy stories. With a criminal organization like Spectre or Cobra,
I love that.
and the larger background.
Yeah.
And I thought that would map really easily to what's already existent. I just got to figure out what exactly does the occult move signify. Is it like brain hacking, like Manchurian Candidate style type things, or is it more explicitly the Soviets have like tapped into the divine right of kings from the Romanov bloodline? And
I love this. You need to write this. I love this idea. It's really good. Yeah, like a Spectre type organization in the background, and that's all really good. Yeah, it's great.
So.
To me, I think what's really interesting about like the structure and what you can do with it is, so for Pizza Time, as an example, Pizza Time is not a campaign. It's a short series, right? It is meant to be played in like 2 or 3 sessions, right? Maybe 4. But the point is, but it still has all of these elements. It's kind of like in miniature, right? So the Dark Conspiracy, it's a little more compact, and it's really, really hyper-focused on the history of the restaurant, right? The mysteries themselves, there's only a handful, and the players can like kind of solve them as they wish, right? But they're always kind of being funneled toward this last big final night in the restaurant, right? So it has like a lot of the same elements, like the character sheets. There are the equivalent of Maven moves, but they're just scaled down. There's just a couple because you're not going to have these characters forever, right? So you can definitely hack it for scope, right? Like you can kind of make things bigger or smaller or even bigger, right? Like I can imagine a much more ambitious version of this, right? Because Brindlewood Bay is, there's only one playbook. The moves are pretty simple. That was an intentional design on my part. It's not because I can't write full PBTA playbooks. I definitely can, but I wanted to achieve my design goal and to really hyper focus on these particular types of characters. I only needed to do one playbook with just some little variations that you could make, right? That was sufficient. Especially because the Crown of the Queen, the Crown of the Void allow you to explore other aspects of the character. But so that's something to think about too. Like you can make it a more involved thing. I'm pretty sure Apocalypse Keys, which I have not looked at yet, to be fair, but I have been consulted on here and there. Jamie like has bigger, fuller playbooks, right? And but they're still using the core mystery structure and mystery engine of Brindlewood Bay, right? So that's another way you can kind of, thinking about scope and how much you need to tell your story or to emulate the genre you're trying to emulate is an important part of that. But having said that, I'm also philosophically a less is more game designer. And so if you can get it done with just a few moves, I think you should aim for that because I think it's more elegant and easier to get to the table. But just want to throw those extra thoughts in there. Any other things we want to discuss about hacks? I mean, I'm kind of loving the ideas that people are throwing out for sure. Any other questions or anything? And also, to go back to what Alicia brought up, the GM-less thing, super interesting idea. I don't have any thoughts on how you do it. Maybe somebody else does. I like GM-less games, but my personal preference is GM-less games that are one-shots. I don't generally care for GM-less games that go beyond one session. Because I think that sometimes it's hard to hang things together when there's not one person who's kind of organizing and directing, right? But I don't think it's impossible. I think it's just a personal preference. But as you work on it, though, I'd love to know how it goes because it's an interesting idea. I don't know if I have any particular thoughts on that right now in the moment. But I don't think it's impossible, though. It doesn't feel like an impossible design goal. So.
I would like the idea, even with that, of having something like your mystery books around you and stuff. If you needed to find the clues, like the whole like open the page point type thing. I mean, just a way thinking of how you could make those clues themselves not required to be written by a GM ahead of time. If you have a bunch of mystery books around, it's thematic, it would fit in. You could grab them, point, to a page or something, and pull out whatever that clue might be in the emergent in that moment.
I like that too. Yeah, I mean, that's a great space for hacking, honestly, like thinking about, going beyond dice, right? I mean, Alicia mentioned cards, but even beyond that, like you said, like, using other types of objects, other types of things to accomplish your goal. It always goes back to design goals for me, right? Like that's the key to me. I think you need to know what your design goals are. Now, to be fair, when I first dived into Brindlewood Bay, I wasn't planning on publishing it. It was a sketch. And so I didn't have super defined goals. But once I sat with it for a minute, I did come up with some. But I do think that like, thinking about your design goals and the most efficient and fun way of getting to your design goals. There's that balance between efficiency and fun, right? It may not be as efficient to have a game that revolves around a Jenga tower, but it might be more fun on measure, right? Like you might get that fun aspect, right? So it's something to think about for sure. If cards are the most efficient way of delivering the GM-less experience that you're looking for, Alicia, then you should definitely do that. But maybe be open to the idea that maybe dice can do it as well, right? Like it really just comes down to goals. I think that's such a big part of it for me as a designer, right? Understanding what I'm trying to accomplish in the design. I think there's I wouldn't expect any of you who are thinking about hacking Brindlewood Bay to just grab Brindlewood Bay and reskin it, right? Like I think it requires more than that. Like I think you should think about which parts are actually useful. The occult move may not be useful for your hack, and so just ditch it, right? Like it's very specific to Brindlewood Bay. There's no, or at least the way I wrote it, it's for Brindlewood Bay, right? It can maybe be used in other contexts, but you shouldn't feel pressured to use it, right? Or to do it that way. In Pizza Time, the theorize move it works the same way, but it has a narrative skin over it. So what you do is you go to one of those like Zoltar fortune-telling machines, right? And you explain your theory, and it delivers the piece of paper that says if you're right or not, right? That's the except it's called La Flaquita, and it's a Santa Muerte animatronic game. But it's like, so I wanted theorize, but I made it specific to Pizza Time, right? Like it made it special for Pizza Time. Like you don't have to just, I don't think it's, I mean, it's easy just to like copy things over and maybe give them a light reskin, but you should also think about like, do I really need it, or should I make changes, right? So, because it may not work for your design goal for your end. As written.
Something that I actually think is really interesting about that as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about my own hacks that I pitched, is the way that each game can take, so all of these things that we talked about that are sort of core to what Brindlewood Bay is, how you can pull them out and emphasize the different aspects of that design. So like maybe it is that core mystery engine that you really want to highlight in your game, or maybe it's more emphasis on this idea of paint the scene and like player engagement and, communal storytelling. So I just think that's really interesting, that each game is going to, like, each setting, I think, each framework that we're using is going to allow us to pull each of those different things out, making, even if they were all very similar, then they would all feel very different by the nature of the emphasis that comes out.
That's a great point. And it's a great point because when I included paint the scene into the mystery structure, what I was doing was I was baking into the game my personal GMing techniques, right? Like I was like, okay, this is something I do when I GM, so I'm going to bake it right into the rules. I definitely could have made it a bigger emphasis, right? My hope is that keepers will take it and just naturally do their own like kind of questioning of players, right? But it's like put in there as an inspiration, I suppose, as well. But yeah, you're right. You can definitely like, you can, like in the first mystery, Dad Overboard, it has a paint the scene in the presenting the mystery section, right? Like it's not just in the location section. So there is a matter of emphasis as well that's really important. And like you said, leads to a different feel. And that's a key insight. It's a good insight. It's great. Well, we are 5 minutes away from our scheduled time. I want to open the floor to the Fragrant Void writers. So the Fragrant Void is a specific supplement official supplement that we're putting out for Brindlewood Bay that includes, that kind of expands on some of the ideas in the book, expands on the idea of sendings and servitors, and it expands on the idea of the Void mystery. It expands on the idea of Brindlewood Bay itself as a town. And it also, like, we also are publishing some of those high supernatural mysteries are going to be in there as well as Chris and Alicia's hack about a lovely elderly gay couple who are trying to figure out what happens to the residents in the people staying in room 3 of their bed and breakfast. Like, they just disappeared. So they're trying to figure out why those people keep disappearing out of room 3. But it takes place in Brindlewood Bay, but it's a one-shot 2-player hack of Brindlewood Bay. So I do want to give the authors who are on the call a chance to ask me some questions or talk about that. If you are not interested in that, you can. This is the time to go ahead and bail out of the call, or you can just hang out while we chat. It's up to you. But I will say, since we'll say that. Before I move on to that, for those of you who did join us for the other parts, thank you for being here. And I hope you found this to be very, very helpful. It was helpful for me just to talk it out, so hopefully it was helpful for all of you to listen and engage. So with that said, let's switch over to the Fragrant Void. I have nothing to say here because we've talked about it a lot on Basecamp, but I do want to just open the floor to any of the Fragrant Void writers, that if you have any questions or anything you want to go over.
I'm one of the writers. I have no questions at this point, mainly because I just came out of a different deadline, so I haven't started on Fragrant.
Fair enough.
So I will probably have questions as I go, and I'll put them into the campfire.
Awesome. Well, and hopefully this was helpful as well for
It
that.
was, yeah, lots of food for thought. Yeah.
Good. Any other Fragrant Void writers have a question or something you want to chat with while you got me? Alicia, go ahead.
Okay. So obviously, Chris and I are. It's a lot of work, surprisingly, to try and take Brindlewood Bay, or as we have been affectionately calling our version, Brindlewood Gay.
Brindlewood Gay.
And trying to shrink it down. And this is like literally sort of a formatting question. We're in a spot where we're keeping some things and we're like, changing some things, and some things are going. And so we're literally trying to figure out how to present that information, especially given our, we don't want this to be 10,000 words. We have our word limit goal that they're trying to hit. So is your suggestion just like, if a section is more or less the same, just be like, refer to the rules, here are any relevant changes?
I think what it should say is, this game assumes that you have the core rules of Brindlewood Bay available, and we're only talking about the differences, and then basically just talk about the differences.
Yeah.
I'll obviously go over it before we go to publish, and so if I feel the need to add something or whatever, we'll do that. But I think as an initial, to answer your question, you don't have to replicate everything that's in Brindlewood Bay. You can just give us the new stuff. Yeah, for sure.
I know that seems very like probably straightforward. But then you get into
That's a
writing.
good question. Yeah.
You're very much like, is this essential to put in the rules or not? Like, what needs to be repeated? There's a lot of doubting yourself involved.
Well, hopefully it's been an interesting process, right? I mean, you know, I like, because I intended to write that, right? Like I had in the universe of things I wanted to write, I was going to write that, but I decided at a certain point that I don't have bandwidth to do it, and so I figured I would toss it out to you guys, and like and I'm happy that you and Chris like kind of grabbed onto it and are kind of excited about it, and I hope it's not too much work, and I hope that you at least get I hope it's an interesting design challenge, right?
Yeah,
because it should be, right? Like,
design challenge, and it actually speaks to this idea of like a lot of it is the same, so it's this narrative reskinning that we're doing to make it like more appropriate for this thing. So instead of, for example,
and scope too, right? Scope's important.
The scope, exactly. Instead of these mystery novels, we've decided that these two men sit down and watch their favorite TV show, which code named right now is definitely not The Outer Limits. And so like that's where that mystery is coming for them and ties into this sort of, and then for our mystery, we're doing more of the high supernatural approach, because obviously we're not doing a murder mystery.
Right,
hopefully people are not being repeatedly murdered in room 3. We had talked early on, and so this is something I want to check in with you about before we go too far down the road, is that we wanted to emphasize the relationship between these men as being a driving factor in the narrative and in the game design and everything. So we have, and we've shrunk down the crowns, which I think are going to be masks for us.
Like that, yeah.
But right now they're called good crowns and bad crowns, and we have this idea
right, yeah.
Bad crowns,
right, yeah.
where the final one is called Together or Not at All. You make the ultimate sacrifice. When your partner is in danger, mark this crown to sacrifice yourself to room 3. Your partner is saved and discovers X number of clues or gets plus X to their next theorize roll. Clearly, we're still working on this.
I love it. Yeah.
And then, but it should be really powerful, is the idea.
Yeah.
And then the player narrates their experience of room 3 and sort of like exits the game.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Like epic.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, I love it. I think one thing that you both might think about is, given the scope of the game, what might be kind of fun and efficient is to have those crown things, or whatever you end up calling them, have them be a shared list, right?
Oh, that's a good idea.
So like the high supernatural mysteries have that special shared crown on them that everyone participates in, right? Because they're only going to get one chance to do this. And so I think it's kind of the same idea with Brindlewood Bay, right? Like if you have like a shorter shared crown list that they both have to engage with whenever someone chooses it, I think that's the right move.
Right. Yeah, I like that, because one of the things we were struggling with was this felt like a big part of the game, right? This like sacrifice thing. But then you end up with what happens if someone sacrifices and you're not even close to solving the mystery yet, and then you're down a player in a 2-player game? That's awkward. No one likes to sit there for a while. So I really like, that's a great idea, this shared list, and that helps us build to, if someone takes this, then we're like triggering the end game.
I think that's the right move. Yeah, I think that's the right way to do it. I think that's going to I think it's going to all fall into place for you. It feels like the right way to do it. Yeah, because maybe they don't solve the mystery, whatever. At least you get to see what happens in room 3.
Yeah.
So that's...
Yeah, I actually like the idea of like, it doesn't, that the potential for there is no solving of this mystery, but since it's driving the narrative, now you have someone who's lost their partner. What do they do now? And then you can go to a sort of very emotional place in the role playing with that.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's beautiful. Yeah, sounds great. Anything else from the Fragrant Void writers that we want to talk about? Chat about? Calvin?
Yeah, I'm doing a list of sort of, it's more like, I guess like GM sort of focus on the dangerous.
The dangerous, yeah.
You can bring danger into your cozy little world, right? Which
GMs, keepers keepers across the world need this badly. Like it's the one part of the rule book I wish I had put in the rule book, but I didn't, and so we're gonna get it done now. But yeah,
and I get why it's necessary too, because then like clues, you need something they can drop in that spices things up, that has those little elements. And you mentioned, like if they are getting attacked by someone, you can't really say who it is yet, right? And I think that's like in that rule book, right? And you kind of give like a little bit of tip on how to bring in those dangerous elements. So I'm going through all my my collection here of Murder, She Wrote and MacGyvers. One of my favorite ones ever is Terry Hatcher actually as Penny Parker in a MacGyver episode with the lead paint. I just love that episode so much. But I'm just wondering, I guess format-wise, just super breezy, easy question for you, the editor then. Do you want just bullet lists? Would you like to have a couple sections, like little short paragraph or maybe like 2-sentence blurb intro and then some bullets? 2-sentence blurb intro, or
I think I'd like it to. I think I'd like to get to be more of a text, like more of a discussion, as opposed to like a bullet list of possible dangers. I mean, I think you can have examples, but I think it would be more effective. I would like it to be more of a teaching thing, because this is the one thing that I do mention it in the core text, but I know keepers, it takes a minute for keepers to get used to it. But like the fact that there can be unseen NPCs that put the mavens in danger, and per the rules of the game, the mavens cannot know who they are, right? Like no matter what they do, they cannot. And that can be a weird, it's not a problem for me. Like when I'm running the game, it's easy for me because it's my game and I don't know how I want it to go. But like, I think keepers could use some ideas for like how to make the danger be occluded, how to make the danger be in the shadows, what sorts of dangers might be in the world, what are some dangers that could happen, like maybe some dangers that are universally applicable, or dangers associated with certain types of locations. Mainly just like just ideas, but also a little bit of advice on how to present those occluded NPCs, right? Those ones that are always in the shadows, right? And those are fun, and also even emphasizing that it's a good role playing opportunity, right? Like anybody who's watching my YouTube videos, for example, they know how I do this. They know how I present those characters. And Aaron's in my game, and like I always do my person who talks like this. You can never see them. You only can hear them, right? Like that, right? Like it's that kind of stuff, right? Like yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I can definitely run with that.
Yeah, like it's more advice. Anything else from the Fragrant Void? All right. Well, anything else at all? Any other thoughts or last minute questions or anything at all? Okay. Well, with that said, this was very fun, very informative. I feel like I talked a lot, but hopefully that wasn't too much to deal with. But it was very, very helpful for me as the author of the game and the publisher of the game to understand where you're coming from and to work out some of these issues. And I hope you found it to be helpful, whether you're participating in the call or if you're watching the video. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video.